Welcome to Seniors on the Move. I'm Karen McKenzie, and most of you know me anyway. We have a really important show for you today, especially if you're a senior, right? This is going to be wonderful information. Get a pad of paper if you want. We have John Neilon with us, Reverend John Neilon, and we're going to talk about what he does. He's currently Spiritual Care Coordinator at Notre Healthcare. So where do we begin? What do you do, John? What is your main function? I know it's a lot of stuff, but...
Yeah. Well, my main role is being part of a hospice care team, providing care at end of life, really to people of any age. I've had an infant, a little baby girl, and I've provided support to a 106-year-old woman.
Wow.
Well, I'll never forget when I asked her if she was ready to go to heaven, she said, "Not quite yet."
God love her.
She still had things to do at 106 years old.
Wow.
So as part of a team, the way I look at it is we face challenges with all of our resources, whether they be physical resources, emotional, or spiritual. So the nurse pretty much focuses on a patient's physical resources, keeping them out of pain as strong as possible. And there's always a little bit of overlap. We have a social worker that deals with a lot of the emotional issues and sometimes the logistical issues that the family has to navigate through. We have a massage therapist, music therapist, and I guess you could say they help with emotional, mental resources, spiritual also. But mine, certainly as a chaplain or a spiritual care coordinator, focuses on the person's spiritual resources to make sure that they're not a source of distress, to make sure that they're a source of comfort, and that they're working to help that person face the challenge of that end of life brings up.
Now, when you say coordinator, you're talking about the other people that you just mentioned that help with all of this.
I'm not really coordinating with, coordinating, yes, along with them.
Along with them.
Along with them.
Okay, now I get it.
Yeah.
All right. And you've already named a few. The music.
Yep, music.
The massage.
The RN's the number one. They have to see the RN. They do not need to see the social worker, the massage therapist, the music therapist, or the chaplain. That's their choice. And we're also working on pet therapy as well.
You are?
Yes.
Oh, that's so important.
We're excited about adding that to our team.
It really does work.
Yep.
I've talked to many people about that. Now, what about denomination? You work with all different...
Yes, we do. All different or no denomination. Notre Dame is still run by the nuns.
It is.
Notre Dame,
wow.
It is. They sit on the board. And down at our long-term care facility and the assisted living, there's still some nuns that are
pretty
busy
well
at
known,
work
yes.
there. They really are all over the world.
Wonderful.
But our healthcare organization is just that, in the community. So whatever the denomination or lack thereof, it really doesn't matter. If you need the care, we'll provide it.
All right. I got lots of questions here for you. When someone gets a diagnosis that they will die within a certain amount of time, what is the first step? They don't just call you, they must be referred by someone, a doctor or...
They actually can just call if they'd like. Typically they're dealing with a doctor, and everyone likely is one to try to fight for health and living. It's just how we're wired. But there comes a time when the treatment begins to be questionable as far as its effectiveness and the what you're gaining from that as opposed to the quality of life that you might be losing. And the thought begins to be, well, what if this is time to, as I say, come in for a landing?
Sure.
My definition of hospice is if life is all about flying, sooner or later we all have to begin our approach and come in for a landing. And hospice is all about making that landing as long and as smooth as possible.
And hospice isn't really that old, is it, as far as...
Well, you had that as one of the things as far as looking into the history. And I confess I
Yeah.
didn't do my research. I'm not so sure what the history has been, how long it's been along. I can tell you this, though, Karen, the concept of hospice has greatly changed. And it's sad that people still think hospice helps you die. You know, they're there to give you their morphine. And I don't think anything could be further from the truth. Not that morphine is not one of many tools that we use to keep people out of pain. But hospice is really there. It sounds like a trite saying, but hospice is there to help you live, not help you die.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it.
I mean,
isn't it?
there certainly is the concept of dying with dignity,
Yes.
but we're there to help you live. You know, what else needs to be done? There's a lot to be accomplished. And back to the, you know, how does that happen? So very often a doctor, if they're familiar with what hospice does, they'll often say, you know, I think it's time to make a referral to hospice. But you don't need a
Okay.
doctor. You know, families often call the agency directly. Typically a doctor might get involved. And then the person sort of might get some information, and the first thing that happens is someone from our agency will go out and do a screening to see if they're
Okay.
eligible. You have to be eligible to come on hospice. And the rule of thumb is certainly a life-threatening situation where it would not be that out of the ordinary if you were to pass within 6 months.
Yes.
But
Okay.
nobody knows.
No one knows.
How do you really know? It's likely,
Yes.
but I've had hospice patients for up to 2 years.
Really?
Yeah.
So there's no set time. In other words, I've heard the 6-month thing.
There is a 6 months, but as long as that person is showing any little sign of decline, and of course it's all insurance driven.
Of course.
The insurance company is satisfied that there is a decline. They will continue to pay the hospice benefit, which is wonderful for the family. Meds connected with the diagnosis and comfort care and all of that.
Even if it is more than 6 months? Is
Yeah,
that
oh
what-
yes, oh yes.
I didn't know
And
that. That's
medical
interesting.
equipment. Families are often very surprised, and if there's one thing that often happens, Karen, they'll say, "I wish we did this sooner." They think that they have to wait till the very end, and that's just not true. So as long as there's sometimes just a little bit of weight loss, a little bit of decline
yeah.
that we can show, and the hospice team is all about showing that so that that person can stay on our services. Once, every so often, a person stays stable for what they call a CERT period. And your first CERT period is 3 months, and after that it goes to 2 months, where they kind of check in on you, see what's happening. And as long as there's a decline, the hospice benefit continues. But if it goes for a while where a person stays stable, they can graduate, come off our hospice,
Really?
which is sometimes bittersweet.
Yeah, sure.
They're glad that their life looks okay a little longer, but they
Yeah.
lose the support of the hospice team.
Do
Yeah.
you go into homes, or is this all done at Notre Dame?
No, we actually, we go into wherever they're living. So we go into homes.
Oh.
We go into
this
nursing
is-
homes. We go into assisted living facilities, independent living facilities. We even just recently got a contract with UMass where we do what's called GIP, which is general inpatient. So if a person is facing a life-threatening situation and the only way they can receive comfort care is something that only a hospital can provide, we will then be another layer of care besides the hospital
Wow.
staff to go into a hospital and provide hospice care. So I would work alongside with the hospice chaplain or the hospital chaplain at UMass.
Wow.
And then same thing goes for nursing homes. We're just another level of care. People always say, well, why do you have to go in hospice if you're in a nursing home? Well, it's another aid. Not all facilities have a chaplain. And so I go into nursing homes, and yeah, we go everywhere.
You're a busy
Go
man.
everywhere. Well, busy agency. Yeah, yeah.
Wow. What about working with children?
Well, we are fortunate to have what we call a pediatric palliative care department. Now, palliative care differs from hospice in that There is a life-threatening situation. The person, and in this case a child, is not going to get better. There is no cure, but they're not dying. And so when all of a sudden a set of circumstances, an illness, a disease, takes a turn, and it looks like that person is going to, that child might die within 6 months, then they shift to hospice care. They go from palliative care to hospice care. Very similar, except hospice is when death seems to be, sooner than later.
Yeah, yeah.
So we have pediatric palliative care chaplains. So they very often keep the chaplain that they have. So very often I'm not called into that situation. Now, oddly enough, my very first patient, when I came on working with Notre Dame, was a 17-year-old young man with brain cancer. And I was his chaplain. I think he was part of our palliative care program. I'm not sure how long, but the circumstances were such that I was the chaplain. Sometimes a child will come directly onto our hospice program. And if that's the case, if the family wants a chaplain, then I step in.
Okay.
So majority of my patients are not children or teenagers, but I've had my fair share over the years.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, that leads us now to your book. Please
Yes,
hold that book up.
My Tale of
And the-
Two Acorns.
I can't wait to hear about this. This is going to be so interesting.
Yeah, well,
and hopeful.
It
and
was
hopeful
interesting for
too.
me too. I never really thought about being an author, but I'm called in to do a lot of funerals. So it's getting to be more and more common that a family or a patient, they're spiritual, but they don't really have a church connection. And so, but they'd like something spiritual, but they don't want it to be overly religious.
Yeah,
And
we hear that a
And
lot.
I say,
don't
I'm
we?
your guy. I always joke with people, I'm
Yeah.
I'm sort of a non-religious chaplain. I'm supposed to reflect where the people are coming from, Karen. That's an important thing about my role as
Yes.
a chaplain. I'm not there to preach to them, to make them believe in a certain something. Most people that want to see me are of a Christian background, some are not. If they're not from a Christian background, they usually have their own clergy. So I don't often need to step in. So I'm asked to do funerals often. And there's a wonderful scripture that, even though it's in the Bible, I wouldn't call it religious at all. And Paul says, as he's talking about dying and the resurrection, he says, surely someone's going to ask two questions. How are the dead raised, and with what kind of body are they going to have in the resurrection? And his answer is not religious at all. It's wonderful. It's this practical lesson where he turns to them and he says, think about it. What you plant doesn't come to life unless it dies. You don't plant the body that will be, you plant a seed of something. And in its time, that seed, only when it's planted, comes to life. So I must have told this story countless times. And so I would use the illustration that an acorn, and each seed gets a body as it's been wired or determined, as God has determined. So a seed of wheat gets a wheat body. And the acorn gets a oak tree body. So in my mind, I started to just see these two acorns kind of hanging out together. And
Wow.
they're beginning to feel that sense of fall coming when it's time for acorns to fall, much to the dismay of the owner of the oak tree that has got to rake up oak trees or acorns in their yard. But fortunately, there's a wise acorn named, I always get them mixed up, it's Flick and Snap. I think Snap is the wise acorn, who lets him know the fact that he has the life of a oak tree inside of him. And that oak tree, the life of that oak tree cannot come out until you fall to the ground and die. So the context of the story is a little boy. I did it with our own family, the little boy that we adopted, and his grandfather. And Dad, you know, what happens when we die? And he takes him outside, and there's an oak tree, and he sits him down and tells him the story of Flick and Snap to help him understand that, like the acorn, we all have a spirit inside of us. Our physical body's like the acorn. But our true life is who we are inside, is spirit. And and we don't really have that true life come out within us until the physical body dies and we go on to that next
thought of
that next place.
that aspect of it.
Yeah,
Wow.
you know, I always say when I do the funeral and we talk about that person, I say, did we talk about their body? Well, maybe a little bit. They might have been attracted. But we talked about what that body carried inside, which was their spirit. And it's so hard to think that when we die, that spirit just goes, what? Poof, and dissipates and is no longer. So that's why the subtitle of the book is a story about life and then death and then life again. Because what you plant doesn't come to life unless it dies.
Now, we're made of energy, right? And energy doesn't dissipate, right?
A lot of people think
it goes
that's
on,
a good
doesn't
way
it?
that it would go on.
Yeah.
Now,
yeah.
some people do believe that. No, we die and we just go into a non-existent state and it's nothing. Some people believe that, and that's okay. And I'll always say, is it hard to believe that we go to this place, this other place, whatever we call it, nirvana or heaven or being absorbed into the universe? Whatever you believe about that, is it hard to believe that that happens? It sure is. I have to be honest.
Yeah.
But I think it's even harder for me to believe that we die after this life of love and experiences and, yes, sometimes pain, that we just cease to exist completely. I think that's harder to believe.
There has to be more.
Yeah. So I choose to believe the thing that's less harder to believe in. So.
All right, we have to take a little break
Okay.
and tell people who you are, really who you are. All right, John Neilon, Reverend John Neilon, a native of Long Island. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
He attended WPI, Worcester Polytechnic Institute in Worcester, receiving a degree in urban studies and planning. Now, while attending graduate school at the University of Miami, he felt a calling to the ministry, which led him to Fort Worth, Texas, where he attended Southwestern Seminary and received his Master's of Divinity, and returned to New England in 1990. What happened to make you divert, to go off into another
Well, the
area?
career change was preceded by a life change, where a set of circumstances and situations, as they often do, make you start thinking about your life and what you believe in. And for me, the faith change came in my mid-20s with, like I said, a set of circumstances that, to give you details, Karen, would take a whole nother show. Suffice to say, I just asked myself, what is it that I really believe in and how serious am I? And I had to challenge God with something and said, God, if you're really there, I need an answer for some things. Now, I joked that I did not go down to Miami to find God. Had some other plans to have fun. And I was perfectly content and happy. And the career, my master's in urban and city planning wasn't something that I ever necessarily had my heart set on. But God kind of showed up. And he did, in fact, through a set of circumstances that answered my prayer, made it impossible for me to believe that he wasn't there. And so I was raised Catholic, had a wonderful experience in my church. But part of what happened down in Miami was I was very specifically led to a Baptist church. But I'll always remember the pastor saying that he was a Christian. He served in a Baptist church. But it wasn't about being Baptist or any particular denomination. It was about believing in God and what God had done for us through the sacrifice of his son Jesus, and what it meant to be a follower, a Christian, a believer, however you might phrase it. And within about a year, it just created such a change in my heart and a desire to communicate this to people that I started to feel a call into the ministry. Always loved to teach. Always loved to counsel.
That helps, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Sure.
So I thought I was crazy at first and talked to some people that I respected, and they thought, no, I think this might be real.
Oh. This is exciting.
And then fast forward, after getting back to New England, working with the Baptist Convention of New England on a church plant, I was looking for a job for a retired gentleman in our little church, and my wife's an RN, and at the time was at Leominster Hospital. Said, look on the hospital website for him. There might be something there. And while I was looking for him, I saw in the miscellaneous category, part-time hospice chaplain.
Oh.
And it was another time when God just very clearly spoke to me and said, that's for you. And so I
Wonderful.
called. It was already being offered to someone else, and I said, no, you don't understand. God told me, this is for me. It
was meant to
they
be.
called me a week later and said they didn't take it, we want to speak to you. And
What
I
a great
fell in
story.
love with hospice work.
Well, I'm sure you do a wonderful
Yeah.
job. I have just a little more to read about you, if you don't mind.
Okay, yeah.
He's been in the ministry for 40 years.
Yeah.
Whoa, as a pastor, a hospice chaplain, and bereavement coordinator, assisting people and their families to navigate end-of-life issues. And that's what I was calling this show, all about end of life.
Yeah.
Because we're all concerned about it, let's admit it. It's really important. Let's do the right thing to make it a little more what?
Yeah.
Give me the right word. A little more...
Palatable?
Palatable is good. We'll come up with another
I
one
like-
too, but that's not
Let
bad.
me throw in a wonderful quote by Mark Twain that we all know we're going to die.
We love Mark Twain.
It might be a paraphrase. We all know we're going to die. We just don't believe it. So hospice, a lot of it is just that acceptance and believing it and being okay with it. I might be jumping the gun because you're going to point in time you're going to kind of say, well, what do you actually do with your family? you finish what you were doing, and then we'll jump into the other part.
And I just want to throw in, Woody Allen said, I don't mind dying, I just don't want to be there. I just thought that was pretty darn good.
That's a little bit funnier than Mark Twain.
He helps people grieve their loss in a healthy way. I like the word healthy.
Yeah.
John has also authored a children's book for all ages.
Yeah.
So it's good for all of us to be reading this, right?
When I was having people proof it for me, so many people said, this would be a really good book for grown-ups. So I call it's a children's book for all ages.
Can I look at it? I'll bring it back up to Notre Dame
absolutely.
for you
Yeah,
if you
sure.
want. You sure you don't need it?
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
We're almost done now.
Okay.
A Tale of Two Acorns is a story about life and death. He resides in Fitchburg and with his wife and 3 children, one of them being a 15-year-old son
Yeah,
now.
Still home.
They adopted at age 4. No
Yeah.
regrets about that, I bet.
No, none at all.
That's beautiful. Now, you said you had something else you wanted to tell me.
Well,
What were you thinking when I interrupted you?
how much time we have?
Oh, about 10 minutes or so.
We got
sure,
more than enough. We're
more,
fine.
as long as you
We're
want.
fine.
This is great.
So, going into hospice work, I don't remember the first door that I knocked on, but I definitely remember thinking, what is this going to be like? Now, my first funeral was my father's funeral. And of course, without knowing it, in the ministry, I visited many people who were dying. And typically, it was a grandparent of someone in the church, and they didn't have a church connection. So I was doing hospice work without realizing it was hospice. But always assumed I would be dealing with people afraid to die.
Yeah.
And I can count on one hand the number of people that were afraid to die. The typical trajectory looks like this, Karen. They get the news, and they're kind of a little bit of shock, but then they're like, well, we all die. And I come to visit, and they're kind of all right with it. There's a spectrum. And then something happens where there's an incident or a reminder that, wow, this is real. And that jolts them.
Yeah.
And so I'm in there, and we talk about that. After they get past that point in time, usually they're very comfortable and at peace with the rest of that landing process. And the main issue becomes, I'm ready, Lord, if they're of faith, I'm ready. What's taking so long?
Interesting.
That's one of the number one issues that I deal with. And so we have this concept that, and I had it this morning with the daughter of a patient that said, we wish God would just take her. And so I wish I had a nickel for every time I said to someone, where do we get the concept that God is up there waiting for this time and it's like, okay, I'm going to take you. You had to look it up. There's only 2 characters in the Bible or in life that I know that God took, which was Elijah and Enoch. They did not experience death. God took them. The rest of us have to experience death. And that, unfortunately, depending upon how we fight and our makeup and what the illness is, we fight it for a long time. God's programmed these bodies to fight for life. And so sometimes that process takes a long time. People wrestle with, am I being punished? It's taken so long. Is there something I'm supposed to do? At that, I always chuckle a little bit and I say, if there really was something you were supposed to do, don't you think God would make that kind of obvious? He would be hiding that from you. If you don't know what it is, then it's likely, no, it's not it. God doesn't take us, He receives us. That's what I tell him. There's a big difference. He's not waiting to take us. He's waiting with you, and He receives us. When that illness or disease is what takes us. So I bring, patients and families some understanding about that. A lot of times their faith needs a little bit of defining.
Yeah.
They're like, I kind of think this. Do you have an assurance of heaven? I think so. I hope so. Well, what's it built upon? And I this is as preachy as I get to say, listen, your acceptance into heaven is not built on being good enough. Thank goodness, because we'd all probably fail.
Oh, thank God.
Yeah, the good news is it's built on what God's done for you, not what we've done for God, and it's built on God's grace, which is receiving something that we don't really deserve, but because God loves us, He gives us a chance to receive it anyway, and we receive it by faith. So that's as preachy as I get.
Yeah, but
and so it gives people, getting back to that their faith is something that helps them and doesn't bring them more confusion or distress. Is God going to accept me? Am I going to go to heaven? Am I going to go to the bad place? Am I going to go to purgatory? What's going to happen? And I was like, calm down. Let's base this on something that's solid. But a lot of people don't do that in their lifetime. But they need that at the end of life. Their faith needs to be based on something solid.
When I was a child, I thought God had a book, swore 3 times.
Oh, yeah. Well,
yelled at your mother, didn't obey.
Those are the 3 classic things at confession, right?
Yeah.
Swore, obeyed, and did something wrong.
Miss Mass.
Yeah.
You were definitely going to hell.
Throw in a few extras just to make sure. Not to offend any Catholics out there.
No.
And we laugh about that, but it's true, and we worry. And, confession is...
Children worry about things like that.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's in your book, or maybe that would be too serious for a child. Or...
Not really. I've thought about writing another in a series of what are the things that we wrestle with.
You do
at end of life, whether we're a child or not. And a lot of people do, you asked me beforehand about the non-religious or the non-believers. Most of the time, a non-believer, whether they're an atheist or an agnostic, they don't usually want to see the chaplain, and they don't have to. Chaplain is optional.
This is an interesting part. Yes.
But very often what happens is, and it's usually men, they don't want to see me, but they seem to be having a really hard time letting go and dying.
Yeah.
I mean, literally eyes wide open for days, not being able to sleep. And the spouse calls me up and says, do you think the chaplain could come? I think my husband needs to see me. Mm-hmm. So I go in and I say, listen, I'm going to give you my spiel. It's what I've learned from hospice patients. I'm not here to preach to you. And I give them my spiel about being born the first time. You had no idea there was this whole other world out there. And you went through this birthing process and sputtered and choked and took your first breath. I sort of use that as an analogy, what we went through when we were born the first time. And there we were born into this world that was there all along that we just didn't see or know about. I add a few things to it, and I tell them I'm not here to BS you. I'm a matter of fact with it because it's a guy. And then I say, listen, I'm going to close with this. whatever I said to you, if it hit home, good. But if it didn't, whatever I say doesn't really matter. I'm going to challenge you to say a prayer, and it was a prayer that changed my life. God, if you're really there, talk to me. If you're really there, speak to me. And Karen, every single situation that I've had where I've gone in and I've done my spiel, within 12 hours, that person dies. And the spouse will call me up and they say, I'm not sure what you said or if it was timing, but it seemed like they had peace and they let go and they passed.
Say it one more time, John. Say it one more time.
What's that?
What you said, what you say at the the last visit, or
Well, the spiel is I give them the birthing process,
Yeah.
that your spirit inside, but I remind them of the first time they were born. And you're in this world, you don't know breathing, eating, running. It was something you would only experience later in the next world.
yes,
And that birthing day came, and you were literally turned out upside down, and you were birthed with people who were waiting for you and loved you already, and you took your first breath. So why did God give us that experience? I think it's because when we're spiritually born at the end of life, we're kind of turned upside down. It might be a little scary. We go through a spiritual birthing process where we're spitting and sputtering, and we take that first spiritual breath around people who've been waiting for us and love us. In a spiritual world that was there all along, we just couldn't see it.
sure.
And some people have said, I've never thought about that. I think that might be my next book.
All right, we're going to wait for
To-
it,
to-
and we'll have you on the show again.
Okay.
Is there anything else that you want to add? Because I'm really taking all of this in myself, as you can see, and enjoying it and learning something.
Well, the other aspect of what I do is for the family members who grieve. And one of my favorite roles has been working with a grief support group. It is
Oh,
an
yeah, that's
unbelievable,
important.
gut-wrenching time of life. We have people come and just cry and don't say a word, and they just cry. And there's a process of grieving, but there's so much to grief that we don't know about, and so much grieving that we do besides losing someone, especially at the end of life. This, seniors on the move, seniors grieve a lot more than I think they even realize. So many changes where we've lost something. And we talked about maybe doing a whole nother show about what do seniors grieve and how do we go through that. And stay, like you said, grieving it in a healthy way.
Yeah.
But a big part of what I do
Key
is to
word.
follow up with grieving family members, whether it's a young spouse. I've had couples that have been married for over 70 years. How do you grieve when you've lost a partner of 70-something years?
Half of you is gone,
Yeah.
really,
And that's never replaced. Never replaced. So,
Well, I can't thank you enough for coming, being here.
you got time for this plug for the events?
Yes,
Okay,
events
so
coming
real quick,
up. Listen, everybody.
Events coming up. We're having a Grieving Through the Holidays workshop that I believe will be November 14th in the afternoon, 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock. Notre Dame, any questions about this can be called directly. And you have a question, they will get you to the right person.
Okay.
So that's November 13th. We have a grief support group that will be coming up in the spring. That will be a call to let us know you're interested, and we will get that information to you. We wait till after the winter because we don't want people driving through the winter. And lastly, we have a remembrance service that will be November 3rd at the Duloc, which is our assisted living chapel on our campus. That's November 3rd. It's a Sunday afternoon from 1 to 3. And again, any questions about this, I'm sure they can call the studio or
Sure.
call Notre Dame, and we'll get the information to them.
Do you want to leave a website or a phone number or both? Or it's
Look
hard
up
to
NotreDame.org.
Like
I'm not even sure.
Just
Well,
look
no,
it up.
I got it
just
right here.
Google it. Oh, you have it? Good.
Well, this is Notre Dame Healthcare, all one word, .org.
Okay. NotreDameHealthcare.org. All right. Wonderful. Again, anything else?
I think that I could go on, but I think that
I
does
bet
it
he
for
could,
now.
but he is very interesting. You have to admit that, whether you believe or not. there's something for everyone. You have something
I appreciate
for everyone.
this venue
I do
to
too.
share all this info.
Can't thank you enough for taking the time. And
welcome.
I think I'm going to meet a lot of people through you, and it's going to be very interesting. And anything that I feel you should know about that's important, that will help you with aging, we will do it. Bye for now, and we'll see you next time.